Joining me to discuss how economics has corrupted us is the Cambridge economist, Dr. Jonathan Aldred. Jonathan, welcome. When you look at British politics, through an economist lens, what politicians have promised on their manifestos and all the rest, they haven't been able to deliver on those promises in broad terms. And what we see is all the socio-economic indicators going in the wrong direction, not least inequality. Yeah. As an economist, are you surprised that we're in the position that we're in?
The promises made by governments that have come to power in the last decade or so, Conservative governments, coalition governments, those promises on inequality and so on weren't worth the paper they were written on. I mean, they didn't believe them when they made the promises, and they didn't do anything when they got into power to try and deliver on those promises.
So was that just a dumb show to keep the electorate happy? And then
basically. I mean, I think that it wasn't that, we tried our best and we couldn't deliver. I mean, that's the usual line, it's austerity, we've got, we're all in it together, we've got to endure this, blah, 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 there's nothing more we can do. There is no alternative.
Tina.
Exactly, in endless variations, it's all nonsense.
Right. Why hasn't there been more political will to fundamentally change our economy? The British economy?
Well, until in the UK, until the dying days of the Ed Miliband time as leader of the Labour Party, there wasn't a critical mass within the Labour Party waking up to the fact that neoliberalism was never going to work. It wasn't about tweaking it. Just a bit tighter regulation, or you can push up.
Technocratic fiddling.
you can inch up the tax rate, on the wealthier people from 40 to 41% or whatever. That wasn't going to cut it. The first sign I felt that the Labour Party leadership were waking up to that was when Miliband started to talk about pre-distribution. Started thinking, hang on, all we do with the minimum wage here, we're just, housing benefit would be a good example. We're just rents in the private sector being jacked up and the government's just picking up the bill by paying housing benefit. And working families tax credit, poverty wages, the government's picking up the bill, filling up the gap with benefit.
So at that time, the opposition were starting to wake up one by one.
Yeah.
In broad terms, the fact that neoliberalism couldn't deliver on the promises that it had set out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember any promises of neoliberalism on inequality. And the promise in that area regarding poverty was trickle down.
Right.
Make the rich super rich and some of it will filter down and the poor were better off.
And when we hit the logical conclusion of that, which is, as we see now, all the inequality, the fact that trickle down hasn't worked and won't ever work, is neoliberalism as a construct now in self-defense mode? Or is the idea that if we do more of it, actually we'll hit this magical land of milk and honey? Oh,
absolutely, if we do more of it. Absolutely. I see very little sign that there's an acceptance that it's a fundamentally flawed paradigm. Rather, it's like after the financial crisis, there's too much regulation and too much intervention by governments. If you just let the market rip.
Animal spirits.
Just complete sort of anarchy, really, market anarchy. The solution's always more markets. An environmental crisis, the solution there is more markets. Rather than the cause of the problem being markets, the solution is more markets.
From an economist's point of view, when you look at Britain today and all the inequality that we face, the political mess that we have in Parliament, and will, I'm sure, have for the foreseeable future, was all this always going to happen when you implement neoliberalism?
You're always going to get more and more inequality. That's pretty inevitable with the neoliberal agenda. And you're going to get this hollowing out of, let's just call it the non-market part of society and the shrinking of the non-market part of society.
Right.
And I think the historical evidence is clear that markets don't work unless they're embedded within a very robust framework of institutions and laws and, political arrangements and so on, and a moral culture that draws lines in terms of how much, what price you can get away with charging.
But all those things
should not, you could ask for a higher salary, but you shouldn't, and so on and so on.
Yeah, but all those things are
they've all been pushed aside and eliminated, yeah.
Do you find it ironic or offensive or whatever that, in fact, our grandparents' generation, parents' generation, to a lesser extent, all the things that were seen as morally absolutely toxic are now seen as, greed is good.
Yeah.
And we need those animal spirits to create wealth. So do what you can, just get more money flooding in.
Exactly. So much of it is just seen as natural behaviour that was once thought of as, is immoral or wicked or selfish, or not even that, just sort of counterproductive. Economic ideas have come out, as I discuss in License to be Bad, which have changed how we see the world, have black is white, and we look at the world in a different way. So what was once seen as selfish or counterproductive or irrational behaviour is now seen as smart. So how people think of cooperation has changed. And so it's not just political expediency, it's a deep misunderstanding, if you like, that's now got embedded, woven into everyday culture about how to achieve things collectively, how society can work effectively.
And to use your language, that then gives us license to be bad.
Exactly. You talked about grandparents and what they'd be thinking. If you think about D-Day a few months back, if you think about that time and the immediate post-war period, their kind of motto was doing your bit.
Yes.
Doing your bit. What did that mean? It meant there was some collective task or endeavour that you did your bit for, and you didn't go into it in terms of what's in it for me, or even does my effort, my contribution, is that more costly than the benefit to society? What's the benefit and what's the cost? You didn't go into that kind of calculation. Instead, you just thought, I want to be part of that. I want to contribute. I want to join in. It kind of goes really deep. It's about how it's kind of changed, subtly shifted understanding of kind of cause and effect of how you can make a difference. Whereas people nowadays think, well, it makes no difference whether or not I vote. It makes no difference whether or not I do my recycling.
So what would today's adage or mantra or, what would a ditty be today, which isn't doing your bit? What would you say today's society has as a theme?
It's kind of if I don't, someone else will.
Opportunism. That's just, look, to hell with everything. If I don't do it, someone else will. I'll probably do it better. I'll make the money.
Yeah, but people don't think, or if they do think, they just immediately blanket. They don't want to think about it. There's a kind of cognitive dissonance. They don't think, what if everybody thought like that? And they just think, hardly be on the end of the nose. If I don't, someone else will. And that they stop themselves thinking further than that, because that's the excuse. That lets you off the hook.
And when you were writing the book, License to be Bad, did you get to the sort of the inception point of that? When did that idea come in? If I don't do it, somebody else will. And also, as important, ignoring all the side effects of that, all the social fallout of that.
Well, it was just trying to kind of try to kind of put my finger on what was it about the kind of revolution in economic ideas post-war. And I mean that quite narrowly. So I don't mean the kind of politics of the Montpellier society and, lobbying and big business. I actually mean new economic ideas like free riding and like social choice theory and public choice theory and all these bits of pure high theory, if you like, that were being developed. But then hang on, then they filtered out into wider society and really made a difference and changed how we think about politics and how we think about voting and how we think about cooperation. So I was sort of trying to put my finger on what difference did they make? Was there a kind of common theme? And then it starts to come to you. It's about, as I say, shifting our kind of morality, the way we see the world. You see, I think what changed significantly in the immediate post-Second World period was this idea that economics should be a science.
Right.
Okay? And what flows from that is you don't look at politics, you don't look at philosophy, you don't look at history, and you express your ideas in terms of these mathematical models. And so immediately you kind of lose your bearings a bit, if you like, compared to the kind of old-fashioned political economy. So there's a kind of intellectual excavation to be done to actually work out what the kind of moral implications are. Because on the face of it, these are just a set of equations. So they don't have moral implications. And, the first defense will be, this is just science. It's neutral. It's morally neutral.
We leave the morals to someone else.
Yeah, there's all that. We're scientists. Before the Second World War, the economics degree in Cambridge wasn't called economics. It was called the moral sciences degree, or tripos is this Latin name they have for degrees. But leave that aside. But anyway, moral sciences. So that shows the history of it. Then you have this push in the US post-war to make economics into a science. And that was heavily influenced by the role of economists as planners in the Second World War, doing those kind of, sometimes calculations like, the sort of, in the UK, it was about nutritional requirements, and what sort of crops could we grow to maximise nutrition. Other times it was, what's the way to kill as many people as possible with bombs? Cambridge kind of resisted that because it was still living in the kind of afterglow of Keynes, and a very different view of what economics was, until 1 month in 1983, when the two most powerful economists in Cambridge who had worked with Keynes, Joan Robinson and Nicky Caldwell, died. And the balance of power in Cambridge economics shifted. And suddenly it then said, let's be a kind of copy, I would say a kind of second-rate version of what was going on in the US.
Our book of the week this week is Licensed to be Bad. You'd be surprised to learn. You've written it, Jonathan. You've spent a long time thinking about it. Tell us why we should read it.
If people talk to me about, what's a good summary of what's been happening in economics, most economists would say that the kind of intellectual innovation in economics is in microeconomics post-Second World War. Well, my book looks at the big economic ideas in economics, microeconomics post-Second World War, and tells the story of those ideas, how they started, what questions they were trying to answer at the time, and how they've filtered out into wider society and changed all our lives, not just the big politics, but just everyday choices.
In that first half, we talked about the fact that economists have broadly had sort of science envy, wanted to become scientists. When they get to work in the morning, they hang their coat up, and also any kind of other aspects of morality or vision of the world. They then focus on a very narrowly defined brief and then say, to hell with everything else. Is that a fair depiction of how mainstream economists sort of work today, still?
Many of them, yeah.
Do they then look at the world and think our discipline is in some way responsible for the chaotic nature of how we organise our economic affairs? Or are they so numb that they just don't see it?
Well, the people we were just talking about, I think they don't see it because they say, my job is to, give you a number which says what level of minimum wage should we have without increasing unemployment, And I've got a mathematical model and I crank that and I give you a number. And
I'm a politician, I take the number.
And you're a politician and it's over to you.
I go and sell it.
It's over to you. And if you want to go with a higher minimum wage or a lower minimum wage, that's up to you, nothing to do with me. What gets left out of that, of course, is in that model that you crank the handle to get that number out, there are all kinds of assumptions about human behaviour and how labour markets work and so on and so on and so on, which are loaded with ideology and so on. Again, it might seem obvious to a non-economist, but we do need to get beyond this idea that economics is a science, particularly this idea that economics is a science somehow that can be a bare comparison to experimental sciences, like chemistry and biology. And then people need to stop. So many people who are too deferential, I think, to economists,
Because they think someone else is looking after them.
Yeah, and the economists will say, we've got this model which has shown that the consequences of Brexit will be blah, blah on trade. And they give you a number and people just take the number and the conversation ends. What should happen is people should say, well, how? Where did you get that number from? What's the mechanism?
And what are the assumptions?
Yeah, what's the argument? Explain it. And if economists can't explain it, well, it's their job. It's going to be their duty as economists. If they want to be, my advice to people is don't listen to economists unless you can understand their arguments.
We agree that economics has corrupted us. We agree that the public have to be a lot more diligent. We agree that politicians have to push economists for the methodology. How does this then affect us on a day-to-day basis?
Well, what we can hope for is automation, AI, and so on. It has the potential to free people from, a lot of boring work.
The drudgery.
And it has potential for, as Keynes said, we can solve the economic problem. We can provide for people's material needs. Take inequality. I think there are, self-limiting elements within capitalism on inequality. At the simplest, crudest level, if inequality gets to extremes, then the poor people can't afford to buy the stuff. And we're already seeing that, which is why there's so much private debt and so on and so on and so on. So, there's only so far inequality can go and something have then got to give. If you look at, climate breakdown, that's a much more worrying problem in the sense that it seems entirely plausible that we won't solve it, that we won't come to a solution. We can kind of look around the edges and we can talk about technical solutions and electrically powered planes, and we can talk about and be pleased about the massive fall in the price of solar power and wind power. And why can't we have solar farms across the Saharan desert? Well, we will. I'm sure we can and we will. And will all that be enough? I'm not enough of an expert and kind of no one quite knows yet, but it's probably enough to stop 5 degrees of global warming,
Right.
but will it be enough to stop 3? So if it turns out it isn't enough, and we then start to see that actually the effects of 1.5 degrees are going to be awful, so we need to stop at 2 degrees of global warming, then what do we need? Well, what we need to unite people around is the idea that you can be happy and indeed happier with less material abundance. It's as simple as that. I mean, it sounds corny almost, but that's what we have to focus on. And we can imagine a scenario whereby lots of people become unemployed or more people become unemployed.
What role do you think Cambridge has had to play in the corruption of economics? I mean, I know we touched on it a little bit, but do you not have a duty of care, responsibility? Should you not all be issuing Hippocratic oaths to economists who are going off into the world? Because you can't sit here and say, yeah, look, Cambridge, we get away scot-free here.
Of course not. You know, there's a lot of what the students are taught, which I don't have control over and I don't agree with. And so part of what I'm trying to do is kind of unpick that and offer a kind of internal critique of what's going on elsewhere in their education. Too often, Cambridge has sort of said, well, you know, what we do is we measure success for our students in terms of, you know, things like how much they earn post-graduation.
It's very frustrating listening, not to you personally, but you depicting these problems, when a lot of them, from a pragmatist point of view, say, well, actually, or from an entrepreneur's point of view, we could undertake putting a course out there where people understand genuinely how the economy works.
Yeah.
And also we can provide the creative leadership that you need to create wealth.
Yeah.
We can put all this together, but no one's doing it.
Well, I think in terms of economics courses that get closer to actually looking at how the real economy works, they are springing up, and some of them have been established for a few years now. They're not at the elite universities.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, but it's not surprising because the elite universities don't feel they have to change. They don't have to, they're already attracting, you know, the students. And it's the conveyor belt. Once you get, you know, an economics degree from London School of Economics or whatever on your CV, then that opens the doors to various jobs. Therefore, knowing that, people apply to read economics at the London School of Economics. What they do in the course is kind of irrelevant.
What is the one measure now that we can begin to embark on to turn the ship around? One
thing I say right at the end of the book is that the purpose of learning economics is to avoid being deceived by economists. Okay, that's a quote from Joan Robinson. So what's each of us, non-economists, all of us, have got to never, you know, don't just take what economists say as given. We've got to challenge that. We've got to demand answers. And if we don't get answers, then we can dismiss what the economist is saying.